The observation deck of the Perseverance offered a view that should have taken Sarah Chen's breath away. The Kalor homeworld hung in the darkness like a blue-green jewel, its 3 moons creating silver crescents against the planet's edge. Cities glowed across the night side, arranged in perfect geometric patterns that suggested a civilization far older than humanity's scattered urban sprawl. Sarah barely noticed. Her eyes were locked on her tablet, scrolling through linguistic patterns for the 100th time that day. "You're going to burn out your brain before we even land," Captain Marcus Webb said, dropping into the seat beside her. He held 2 coffee bulbs, offering her one. "When was the last time you slept?" "Sleep is for people who aren't about to make first contact with an alien civilization." Sarah accepted the coffee anyway, taking a grateful sip. "Besides, something's bothering me about their liturgical language." "Their church language?" "Sarah, we've got diplomatic protocols to worry about. Trade agreements. Technology sharing. Why are you obsessing over their prayers?" Sarah turned her tablet toward him, though she knew he wouldn't understand the phonetic breakdowns filling the screen. "Because it keeps pinging my database. The Kalor have been transmitting cultural information for 6 months. Right? Basic language. Customs. History. But their religious texts, the really old ones, they have phonetic structures that match Earth languages." Marcus frowned. "That's impossible. We're 1,200 light-years from Earth." "I know. That's what bothers me." Sarah highlighted a section of text. "Look at this blessing. The word structure, the consonant clusters, even the vowel harmony. It's remarkably similar to Proto-Indo-European reconstructions." "Proto what now?" "The theoretical ancestor language of most European and Indian languages. Sanskrit, Latin, Greek, they all descended from it. We've reconstructed it based on common patterns, but nobody's spoken it in 6,000 years." Sarah rubbed her eyes. "It's probably just convergent evolution. Language patterns that work tend to show up independently, but the similarities are uncanny." The ship's intercom crackled. "All diplomatic personnel to the shuttle bay. Landing in 30 minutes. Re. Sarah's stomach clenched. 6 months of preparation, and suddenly 30 minutes felt like no time at all. She was part of the first human team to actually meet the Kalor face to face. Everything until now had been transmissions, videos, careful exchanges of information across the vast distance. Now they would stand on alien soil, shake alien hands, and try not to cause an interstellar incident. "You ready for this?" Marcus asked. "No," Sarah admitted. "But I don't think anyone could be." The shuttle descent was smooth, the Kalor having provided precise landing coordinates and navigational assistance. Through the viewport, Sarah watched their destination grow closer. The landing site was a grand plaza, surrounded by soaring structures that seemed to be half crystal, half metal. Thousands of Kalor had gathered, their forms visible as vaguely humanoid shapes at this distance. Ambassador Elena Liu ran through the protocol one final time. "They bow, we bow. They extend their right hand, we extend ours. Dr. Chen, you'll handle any linguistic difficulties. But the translation implants should manage basic communication. Remember, this is just a greeting ceremony. We're not negotiating anything today." The shuttle touched down with barely a whisper. The ramp extended. Sarah's heart hammered as she followed Ambassador Liu down onto alien ground. The Kalor High Priest stood at the center of the welcoming committee. And Sarah's first thought was that he looked like he'd walked out of an ancient myth. Tall, easily 7 feet. With sleek, blue-gray skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. 3 eyes, arranged in a triangle on his face, regarded them with what Sarah hoped was warmth. He wore robes of deep purple and held a staff carved from some dark material that seemed to drink in the light around it. "I am Velthoron, High Priest of the Eternal Remembrance," he said, his voice resonant and deep. Sarah's translation implant rendered his words into English. with only a slight delay. On behalf of the Kalor Ascendancy, we welcome the humans to our world. May this meeting be the first of many peaceful exchanges. Ambassador Liu stepped forward, her response carefully rehearsed. On behalf of humanity and Earth, we thank you for your welcome. We come in peace, seeking friendship and understanding between our peoples. The formal exchanges continued, each side speaking their prepared greetings. Sarah stood slightly behind the ambassador, her role as translator technically unnecessary, with the implants functioning properly. But she listened carefully to every word, her trained ear picking up nuances the translation software might miss. Then Velthorin raised his staff and spoke in a different language. The words were clearly ceremonial, formal, ancient. Sarah's implant stuttered, producing choppy, uncertain translations. The high priest was giving a blessing in what must be their liturgical language, the same ancient tongue from the texts Sarah had been studying. Something in her mind clicked. The phonetic patterns, the structure, the way certain sounds flowed together. It was so similar to her reconstructions of Proto-Indo-European that her brain automatically began parsing it according to those rules. Without thinking, trained by years of linguistic study to respond in kind when greeted formally, Sarah spoke. The words came out in reconstructed Proto-Indo-European, a phrase she'd been practicing just yesterday while studying the parallels. H1 weg, she began, then completed the blessing. We walk in light. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Velthoron's staff fell from his hands, clattering against the marble plaza with a sound that echoed in the sudden silence. His three eyes widened until Sarah could see the gold flecks in their depths. The other Kalor in the welcoming committee stumbled backward, several falling to their knees. The high priest's mouth moved soundlessly for a moment. Then he whispered, his voice filled with something between awe and terror, in perfect, unaccented English. You speak the tongue of the first makers. Sarah felt Ambassador Liu's hand grip her arm, tight enough to hurt. Captain Marcus had moved forward, his hand instinctively near his sidearm. The entire diplomatic team had frozen, confused, and alarmed by the reaction. I'm sorry, Sarah stammered, her mind racing. I didn't mean to cause offense. I was just responding to the blessing. But Velthorin wasn't listening. He had dropped to one knee. Around the plaza, thousands of Kalor were following suit, kneeling, their voices rising in what sounded like a chant or prayer. The first makers spoke thus, Velthorin said, tears now streaming down his face. The gods who lifted us from ignorance, who gave us language and knowledge and hope, who vanished 40,000 years ago. We have preserved their words in sacred ritual, spoken them every day for 400 centuries. But their meaning was lost to us 30,000 years past. We knew only the sounds, holy sounds, never understanding what they meant. His eyes fixed on Sarah, with an intensity that made her want to step back. But you spoke them. You spoke them and knew what you were saying. How is this possible? Sarah's mouth had gone dry. Her mind replayed what he'd said. 40,000 years. A language preserved but not understood. Phonetic patterns that matched Earth's most ancient reconstructed proto-language. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. But as she looked at the kneeling priest, at the thousands of Kalor prostrating themselves, at the staff lying forgotten on the ground, Sarah felt the foundations of everything she thought she knew beginning to crack. High Priest, she managed to say, I think we need to talk. The Forbidden Archive was not what Sarah had expected. She'd imagined something dusty and ancient, filled with crumbling texts and primitive data storage. Instead, the chamber deep beneath the Grand Temple hummed with power, its walls covered in holographic projectors that had somehow remained functional for tens of thousands of years. Ambassador Liu had tried to stop her from going. This is way outside protocol, Dr. Chen. We don't split up the diplomatic team. We don't go to secondary locations without proper security assessment, and we certainly don't let them take our linguist into some forbidden religious site. But Velthorin had been insistent, almost desperate. Please. If she truly speaks the first tongue, she must see. She must understand what it means. No outsider has ever entered the archive, but the prophecies spoke of this. They said the Makers would return speaking the holy words. In the end, Captain Marcus had accompanied Sarah, along with 2 security officers and Ambassador Liu herself. The Kalor had allowed it, though Sarah could see the discomfort on their faces at letting armed humans into their holiest place. Now she stood in the center of the archive, surrounded by more preserved history than she'd ever seen in one place. Velthorin moved among the controls with practiced ease, his earlier shock replaced by an almost manic energy. We Kalor have kept records for 40,000 years, he explained, his hands dancing across holographic interfaces. When the first Makers came, we were nothing. Animals who used simple tools, who lived in caves, who knew only hunger and fear and death. They changed everything. The room darkened. Then light blazed to life around them, and Sarah gasped. The hologram was 3-dimensional, filling the space around them with perfect clarity. It showed a younger world. Forests, where cities now stood. And walking through those forests were figures that made Sarah's heart stop. They were human, unquestionably. They wore clothing unlike anything from Earth's historical record, materials that seemed to shift and shimmer. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had achieved even now. But their faces, their builds, the way they moved, it was all human. The first Makers, Velthorin breathed. We preserved every recording, every image, every scrap of their presence. This is the landing, 42,000 years ago by your calendar. Watch. Sarah watched. She couldn't have looked away if she'd wanted to. The humans in the recording were teaching. A group of primitive Kalor, barely more advanced than early hominids, gathered around them. The humans demonstrated agriculture, showing how to plant seeds and tend crops. They showed mathematics, drawing figures in the dirt. And they spoke, their voices preserved across the millennia. Sarah's translation training allowed her to pick out words, phrases. The language was definitely Proto-Indo-European, in structure, though more advanced, evolved. She caught words that sounded like ancestors to Sanskrit terms for sun and grow and learn. They stayed for 3 generations. Velthorin continued, his voice thick with emotion. They taught us language, gave us tools, showed us how to build. They brought us from darkness into light. And then, the hologram shifted, showing humans boarding a massive ship, Kalor watching in apparent distress. Then they left. The holy texts say they received a message, a call from their home. They promised to return, but never did. Why? Marcus asked quietly. Why would humans from 40,000 years ago be out here, uplifting alien species? That's what I need to know, Sarah said. Her scientific mind was racing, trying to process what she was seeing. High Priest, can you show me more? Everything you have about where they came from? What they said about their home? The next hours passed in a blur. Sarah watched recording after recording, taking notes frantically on her tablet. The technology the ancient humans possessed was staggering. Faster than light travel, matter synthesis, energy manipulation that seemed almost like magic. Yet, despite their advancement, they'd spent years teaching primitive aliens with patience and care. But it was the language that fascinated Sarah most. She could hear the evolution. The way Proto-Indo-European structures had developed beyond Earth's natural progression. These people had left Earth before recorded history began, but they'd taken humanity's linguistic heritage with them. There. Velthorin pulled up a new hologram. This is the most complete record we have of their departure speech. For 40,000 years, we have recited these words every day at sunset, though their meaning was lost 30,000 years ago. Can you understand it? We, Q. Sarah listened. The human, in the recording, spoke slowly, clearly, as if wanting to ensure the words would be preserved. The language was archaic, the pronunciation different from her reconstructions, but the structure was there. She began to translate, her voice shaking. We are not gods. We are only people, like you will become. We came from far away, from a world that faced death. We survived, but we are few, and we are scattered. We have given you what we can. May you grow strong. May you surpass us. May you remember us not with worship, but with the determination to become greater than we ever were. Velthorin sank to the floor, his entire body trembling. 40,000 years. 40,000 years, he whispered. 40,000 years we called them gods, built temples in their honor, prayed to them, and they never wanted that. They only wanted us to grow. High Priest, Sarah said gently, you mentioned they came from far away. Do you have any astronomical data? Star charts? Coordinates? Anything that might show where they originated? Velthorin looked up at her, and Sarah saw understanding dawn in his 3 eyes. You think they came from your world? From Earth? I don't know, but I need to find out. The star charts were stored in a separate section of the archive, preserved with the same meticulous care as everything else. Ancient Kalor astronomers had recorded the night sky as it appeared when the first makers arrived, including notations of which direction their ship had come from. Sarah's hands shook as she uploaded the data to her tablet. The ship's navigation computer could adjust for 40,000 years of stellar drift. Calculate where those stars would have been in the galaxy when the recordings were made. Ambassador Liu stood beside her as the calculations ran. Sarah, if this shows what I think it might show. I know, Sarah said. The tablet beeped. The calculation was complete. Sarah pulled up the result, her breath catching in her throat. The origin point, adjusted for stellar drift over 42,000 years, appeared as a glowing marker on the galactic map. It pointed directly to the Sol system, to Earth. The archive fell silent, except for the quiet hum of ancient technology. Sarah stared at the screen, her mind unable to fully process what she was seeing. They were human, she whispered. 40,000 years ago, humans had faster than light travel. They had all of this. And somehow, we forgot. It all disappeared. We started over from scratch. Marcus was the first to speak. The Toba supervolcano eruption. Roughly 70,000 years ago, genetic evidence suggests humanity was reduced to maybe 10,000 individuals. But what if it was worse than we thought? What if some of them escaped to space? And then, something happened, Ambassador Liu added slowly. Something that prevented them from coming back. Their civilization collapsed. Maybe their technology failed. The ones who stayed on Earth survived and rebuilt, but had to start from the beginning, and the ones out here, scattered across the stars, became gods to the species they tried to help. Velthorin finished. He stood slowly, with dignity, and approached Sarah. When he spoke, his voice was steady despite the tears on his face. All my life, I believed in divine beings who shaped us. Now I learn they were mortals who chose kindness over survival. That is not a lesser thing, human. That is greater than any god. Sarah met his eyes. What happens now? Now? Velthorin looked around the archive, at the preserved history of his people's transformation. Now, we must tell both our peoples the truth. And then, a strange expression crossed his face, something between grief and hope. Then, we must find out what happened to the others. The first makers visited many worlds before they left us. The coordinates are in the records. If your ancestors saved us, perhaps they saved others too. Sarah thought about Earth, about humanity's long climb, from the caves to the stars. They'd thought themselves young, newcomers to the galaxy. But instead, they were children coming home, returning to a legacy they'd forgotten they had. Yes, she said. We need to find the others. We need to find all of our distant cousins. Outside the archive, Sarah knew, debates would rage. Skeptics would demand more proof. Politicians would argue about what it meant. Military leaders would worry about the implications. But standing in this room, surrounded by 40,000 years of carefully preserved hope, Sarah knew the truth in her bones. Humanity had walked among the stars before. They'd shared their light with others. And now, millennia later, those others were waiting to share that light back. The emergency session aboard the Perseverance had been going for 3 hours, and tempers were running high. Sarah sat at the conference table, exhausted, while her tablet streamed live audio from a parallel meeting happening on Earth. Every military commander, diplomat, and scientist seemed to have an opinion, and none of them agreed. It's clearly a manipulation, Admiral Kowalski said, his face hard on the view screen. The Kalor have studied our languages from the transmissions we've sent. They've constructed an elaborate religious theater to make us think we have some historical connection. It's a psychological operation, designed to make us lower our guard. With respect, Admiral, that makes no sense, Sarah said, trying to keep her frustration in check. The Kalor transmitted their religious texts to us months ago, before they had significant exposure to human languages. I was studying those texts before we left Earth. The linguistic patterns were already there. Perhaps they've been preparing this for longer than we know, suggested Director Park from Earth's Intelligence Division. Our first radio transmissions reached nearby stars decades ago. They could have been studying us for years. Ambassador Liu leaned forward and faked 40,000 years of holographic records, created an entire archaeological record of human presence, all on the chance that we'd eventually develop FTL and show up? The paranoia here is reaching absurd levels. Captain Marcus pulled up data on the main display. I've had our science team analyzing the archive recordings. The technology shown is consistent with the age claimed. The holographic storage medium shows degradation patterns that would take tens of thousands of years to develop. Unless the Kalor have mastered time travel in addition to everything else. These records are genuine. Recorder. These AB'd. Sarah's tablet chimed with an incoming priority message. She glanced at it and felt her stomach sink. We have another problem. I'm getting reports from the Kalor capital. There's been an attack on our embassy building. The room fell silent. Ambassador Liu grabbed her own tablet, her face going pale as she read. 2 dead. Both human diplomatic staff. The Kalor authorities are saying it was a religious extremist group. They're calling themselves the Purifiers. Extremists? Admiral Kowalski's expression hardened. This is exactly what I was warning about. We're in danger. I'm ordering an immediate evacuation. No, Velthorin's voice came from the doorway. The Kalor priest stood there, his robes torn and blood staining his shoulder. 2 Kalor guards flanked him, looking equally battered. Please, you must not leave. Not like this. Sarah jumped up. You're hurt. I fought to protect your people. Velthorin said, moving painfully into the room. When the Purifiers attacked your embassy, I and others who believe in truth stood against them. We failed to save everyone. I am sorry. I am so deeply sorry. He sank into a chair that wasn't designed for Kalor physiology, too drained to care. My people are fracturing. Some, like the Purifiers, believe you are demons wearing the skin of gods, here to destroy true faith. Others believe you are literally the first makers returned, and want to worship you. And some, like me, see the terrible, beautiful truth that our gods were mortal, that they were capable of both greatness and failure, and that makes their choice to help us more meaningful, not less. What's going to happen? Marcus asked quietly. Velthorin shook his head. Civil conflict, perhaps. My people have built our entire civilization around the worship of the first makers. Learning they were human, that they died or failed or simply never came back, it breaks something fundamental in many minds. The Ascendancy Council is in chaos. The military wants to contain the situation. Religious leaders are arguing about doctrine. It is a mess. Sarah felt the weight of guilt settling on her shoulders. No, Veltheron said firmly. Truth is not fault. Lies may comfort, but they are still lies. For 30,000 years we spoke words we did not understand, built a faith on ignorance. That was always going to end badly. Better it end now, with the possibility of something real to replace it. He looked at Sarah with his 3 eyes, and she saw exhaustion and pain and stubborn hope in them. You asked what happens now. I know what must happen. You must speak to the Ancestors' Gate. The what? The first makers left us one final gift. A structure on our 4th moon, built with their incomprehensible technology. For 40,000 years it has stood there, dormant. We have maintained it, studied it, prayed to it, but never understood its purpose. Every attempt to activate it has failed. Velthorin leaned forward. But the last first maker to leave us said something before boarding their ship. We have the recording, she said. If we cannot return, perhaps our children will. The gate will know the first tongue. Only the first tongue will wake it. Sarah's mind raced. You think I can activate it? I think if anything can stop my world from tearing itself apart, it is proof. Real proof. Not holograms that skeptics can doubt, but a device built by the first makers responding to a human voice. If the gate recognizes you, if it wakes for you, then there can be no doubt. 2. Admiral Kowalski's voice came harsh from the speaker. Absolutely not. We're not sending our people to interact with unknown alien technology. The risk is unacceptable. Ride. The risk is unacceptable. The risk of doing nothing is civil war on the Kalor homeworld, Ambassador Liu countered. Possibly millions of deaths. And what happens to human-Kalor relations then? What happens to our chance at peaceful integration into galactic society? This isn't our problem to solve, the Admiral insisted. We need to think about human safety first. Sarah stood up, surprising herself with her own conviction. With respect, Admiral. Yes, it is our problem. If ancient humans really did uplift the Kalor and then vanished without explanation, we owe them answers. We owe them the truth about what happened. And if there's any chance that this gate can provide that truth, we have to try. The argument raged for another hour. But in the end, Ambassador Liu made the executive decision as head of the diplomatic mission. They would go to the moon, to the Ancestors' Gate. A small team. Sarah, Marcus, 2 security officers, Velthorin, and a group of Kalor scientists. The shuttle ride to the 4th moon was tense. Sarah reviewed everything she knew about Proto-Indo-European, about Sanskrit, about the ancient human languages that had somehow survived in Kalor ritual. She had no idea what the gate would require, what specific words or phrases might activate it. The moon was small, barely more than a large asteroid, but as they descended toward the landing coordinates, Sarah saw it, a structure that made her breath catch. It was massive, easily a kilometer across, built from materials that seemed to shift between metallic and crystalline. Perfect geometric patterns covered its surface, and it hummed with some kind of energy even her instruments couldn't fully analyze. 40,000 years old, and it looked like it had been built yesterday. My ancestors have guarded this place for 400 centuries, Velthorin said softly. We built temples around it, studied it, preserved it. But we never understood it. Perhaps today, finally, we will. They landed near the main structure. As Sarah descended the shuttle ramp, She felt the weight of history pressing down on her. Somewhere, 40,000 years ago, humans had built this. Her ancestors had stood where she stood now. The gate's entrance was marked with symbols that Sarah recognized as proto-language roots. She traced them with her fingers, feeling the smooth surface beneath her touch. "These are numbers," she said. "And this looks like instructions for a sequence." "We tried every sequence we could imagine," one of the Kalor scientists said. "We have attempted to activate the gate for our entire recorded history. Nothing has ever worked." Sarah stepped up to what looked like a central interface. It was clearly designed for human hands. The proportions were all wrong for Kalor physiology. She placed her palm against it and felt a faint vibration. "Here goes nothing," she muttered. Then, in the most ancient form of Proto-Indo-European she could reconstruct, she spoke the words carved around the entrance. "I am a child of those who built this. I seek understanding. I seek truth. Awaken and speak to me." For a long moment, nothing happened. Sarah felt disappointment beginning to build, felt the skeptical part of her mind saying she'd been foolish to hope. Then the gate blazed to life. The light that erupted from the ancestors' gate was like nothing Sarah had ever seen. It swirled in colors that shouldn't exist, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. Energy crackled across the structure's surface, and a deep thrumming sound resonated through the moon's thin atmosphere. Through their suits. Through their very bones. Sarah stumbled backward, but Velthorin caught her, his hand surprisingly gentle, despite his alien physiology. Around them, the Kalor scientists were dropping to their knees, their voices rising in what sounded like prayers, or maybe just awe. The light coalesced at the center of the gate, forming a swirling portal of energy, and through that portal, images began to pour. Sarah's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. The images came fast, overlapping, a cascade of information that felt like trying to drink from a fire hose. But gradually, patterns emerged. A story began to take shape. Earth. But not the Earth Sarah knew. This Earth was dying. The images showed massive volcanic eruptions, ash clouds blotting out the sun. They showed ice spreading across continents, oceans freezing solid. Sarah recognized the geography. This was the Toba supervolcano eruption, roughly 70,000 years ago. But the images showed something more, something worse. The eruption had triggered a volcanic winter far worse than archaeologists had theorized. Temperatures plummeted, plants died, animals starved, and humanity, already scattered and vulnerable, faced extinction. But these humans, these ancestors, they'd had something the archaeological record never suspected: technology. Not primitive stone tools, but real technology. Advanced technology. They'd been in their own version of a scientific revolution when catastrophe struck. They'd just developed faster than light travel. Sarah breathed, watching the images unfold. It was new, experimental. They had maybe a dozen ships capable of it. The images showed desperate preparations. Not everyone could be saved. There wasn't time, wasn't space, wasn't resources. Decisions had to be made, terrible decisions. Who would go? Who would stay? In the end, maybe 5,000 humans boarded those ships. 5,000 out of millions. They left Earth not as explorers or conquerors, but as refugees fleeing a dying world. Behind them, they left their families, their friends, their entire civilization, hoping against hope that those who remained might somehow survive. The ships scattered. They'd agreed to spread out, to find habitable worlds, to ensure that even if some failed, humanity might survive somewhere. Each ship carried not just people, but data, the sum of human knowledge, language, history, culture, everything they could preserve. One ship came to the Kalor homeworld. Sarah watched as humans, traumatized and grieving, discovered a species of intelligent but primitive aliens. They'd seen what extinction looked like. They couldn't bear to let it happen to someone else. So, they stayed. They taught. They shared. For 3 generations, human survivors worked alongside primitive Kalor, lifting them from the Stone Age, giving them agriculture and mathematics and language and hope. They gave them everything they could, knowing they might never see the results of their work. Then came a signal. A transmission from Earth, weak and distorted, but unmistakable. Survivors. Humans had survived on Earth. The images showed the terrible choice the refugees faced. Return to Earth and try to reunite with their species? Or stay with the Kalor? Continue the work they'd started? They didn't have enough ships for everyone to return. The technology was breaking down. Resources running low. In the end, most chose to go back. They left behind knowledge, records. This gate, as a testament to their presence. They boarded their failing ships and pointed them toward home, hoping desperately to reconnect with whatever humanity had managed to preserve. The images showed their journey, showed ships failing, one by one, showed desperate repairs in the void between stars, and showed, finally, one battered ship limping into the Sol system, broadcasting on every frequency, hoping to be recognized. What they found broke them. Earth had survived, but barely. The humans who'd endured the volcanic winter had lost almost everything. They'd regressed to subsistence level, scattered in tiny groups across a hostile world. 40,000 years of civilization, gone. They'd had to start completely over, rebuilding from nothing. The returning refugees' arrival went unrecorded, unremembered. Their technology was so far beyond the Stone Age survivors that it might as well have been magic. They tried to help, tried to share their knowledge again, but the divide was too great. You can't teach calculus to people struggling to remember how to make fire. And their ships were dying. The technology that had carried them across the galaxy was failing, irreplaceable parts breaking down. Within a generation, within 2, it would all be gone. The final images showed the choice the refugees made. They could keep themselves separate, try to preserve their technology, maintain their superiority. But that way led to stagnation, to a tiny group hoarding knowledge while the rest of humanity struggled. Or they could integrate, marry into the survivor populations, let their technology die but pass on their genes, their stories, their hope that someday humanity might rise again. They chose integration. They chose to believe in the future. The images showed their technology failing, their ships crumbling, their carefully preserved knowledge degrading. Within a few generations, it was all gone, surviving only as myths, stories of people who could fly, who could speak to the gods, who came from the stars. These stories warped and changed over millennia, becoming legends, then religion, then half-remembered cultural touchstones. The refugees' descendants became part of the general human population. Their genetic legacy spread across the globe. Their linguistic contributions seeped into early human languages, creating the Proto-Indo-European roots that would eventually spawn Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, and dozens of other tongues. And 40,000 years later, those descendants stood on an alien moon, learning that their ancestors had tried to seed hope across the stars. The portal flickered. A final image appeared, and Sarah gasped. It was a recorded message. A woman standing in front of what must have been one of the last functioning ships. She looked exhausted, heartbroken, but also determined. She spoke in ancient Sanskrit, the language evolved from Proto-Indo-European, and Sarah's implant translated. To whoever finds this message, we were not gods. We were not special. We were survivors who tried to do good with what little we had. We saved the Kalor because we knew what extinction felt like, and we couldn't bear to let it happen to others. We visited 17 worlds, gave what we could to the people we found, hoped it would be enough. The woman's eyes were wet with tears. We tried to get home. We failed. Most of us died trying. Those of us who made it back found our world had survived, but barely. Our technology is dying. In a generation, maybe two, it will all be gone, and we'll be just another group of Stone Age humans trying to survive. She smiled, sad but real. But that's okay. Because the survivors on Earth, they're strong. They'll rebuild. Maybe it will take thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands, but they'll do it. And when they do, when they reach the stars again, maybe they'll find the people we tried to help. Maybe they'll find the Kalor, or the Vrithan, or any of the others. Maybe our children will meet their children and recognize each other. The woman placed her hand on what looked like a control panel. This gate is our last gift. It contains coordinates for every world we visited, every species we tried to help. Someday, when humanity is ready, they can use it to find their distant cousins. Until then, it sleeps, waiting for the first tongue to wake it. She looked directly at the recording, as if she could see across 40,000 years to whoever might watch. We weren't perfect. We made mistakes. We lost so much. But we refused to let hope die. We planted seeds across the stars, and we're planting one final seed here on Earth. May those seeds grow into something beautiful. The message ended. The portal flickered and stabilized, showing a star map with 17 points highlighted across the galaxy. Sarah realized she was crying. Behind her, she heard similar sounds from the human crew. Even the Kalor seemed affected, their voices low and reverent. Velthoron moved to stand beside Sarah, looking up at the portal. 40,000 years, he said softly. 40,000 years we believed the first makers were gods who abandoned us. Instead, they were refugees who gave us everything they had, then tried desperately to get home to save their own people. They didn't abandon anyone, Sarah said. They ran out of time. They saved who they could, including your ancestors, and then they did their best to save their own. And they left this behind, hoping someday we'd be ready to understand. Captain Marcus was working his tablet, comparing the gate's coordinates with known star charts. These 17 systems. Some of them we've detected radio signals from, preliminary signs of technological civilization. We thought they were just other species developing independently. They're family, Sarah said. She turned to look at her crew, at the Kalor scientists, at Velthoron. They're our distant cousins. Humanity spent 40,000 years thinking we were alone, that we climbed from the caves to the stars by ourselves. But we weren't alone. Our ancestors made sure of that. They scattered hope across the galaxy. What do we do now? One of the security officers asked. Sarah looked at the star map floating in the portal, at the 17 worlds waiting to be visited. She thought about the woman in the message, about 5,000 refugees choosing to share rather than hoard, to teach rather than dominate, to hope rather than despair. Now, Sarah smiled through her tears, now we go find the others. We go meet the rest of the family. 6 months had changed everything. Sarah stood on the observation deck of the joint exploration vessel, Legacy, watching another new world grow larger in the viewports. This was their 8th stop, and each one had been a revelation. The ship itself was a marvel, a true collaboration between human and Kalor engineering. Humanity's newer FTL technology, combined with Kalor's mastery of energy systems and their meticulous historical records. The crew was mixed too. 30 humans, 40 Kalor, and now 5 Vrithan from the second world they'd visited. Sarah had stopped thinking of them as aliens weeks ago. They were colleagues. They were friends. They were family. In the strangest and most wonderful sense of the word. Nervous? Velthoron asked, moving to stand beside her. The Kalor priest, former priest really, had given up his position to join the Legacy initiative. He wore practical coveralls now instead of ceremonial robes, though he still carried a small prayer stone from the temple where he'd served. Always nervous before first contact, Sarah admitted. Each world is different. Each culture has evolved in its own way. But they all remember, Velthoron said. In their own way, they all remember the Sky Teachers. He was right. Every world the gate's coordinates led them to showed the same pattern. An intelligent species, uplifted from primitive conditions between 35 and 45,000 years ago. Each had myths of teachers from the stars, of beings who brought knowledge and then vanished. Each had preserved fragments of human language in their oldest texts, their religious ceremonies, their cultural memories. The Vrithan remembered them as the Bright Ones, beings of light who taught them to work metal and read the stars. The Kethril called them the First Voices, who gave them written language and mathematics. The Zephani knew them as the Sky Gardeners, who showed them agriculture and genetic cultivation. 17 worlds, 17 species. All children of a humanity that had refused to let hope die. The discovery had transformed human civilization's understanding of itself. Earth's historical records were being rewritten. Archaeological digs were taking on new significance as scientists searched for any remaining evidence of the ancient refugee technology. Linguistic studies were exploding with new insights as researchers compared human proto-languages with the fragments preserved across the stars. But the real transformation was philosophical. Humanity had spent its entire remembered history thinking itself young, new to the stars, cautious explorers in an unknown universe. Now they knew better. They were returning home, finding the gardens their ancestors had planted in the darkest times. Approaching optimal orbit, the ship's pilot announced, ready for preliminary scans. This world was designated Haven 7 in the gate's records, 9th on the list to visit. Initial observations showed a thriving technological civilization, roughly equivalent to Earth's late 21st century. They had radio, satellites, were just beginning to experiment with their own interplanetary vessels. Sarah pulled up the cultural data they'd gathered from passive observation. The species called themselves the Meridian. Bipedal mammalians with 4 arms and a complex social structure. Their oldest religious texts spoke of the Starbringers, mysterious beings who'd appeared in their darkest age and given them the gift of knowledge. There's a phrase they use in their morning prayers, Sarah said, reading from her notes. It translates roughly as, "We walk in light, as those who came before." Sound familiar? Velthoron's 3 eyes widened. The first blessing. The words you spoke when we first met. The same basic phrase has appeared on 6 of the 8 worlds we've visited. It's like a linguistic fingerprint. The refugees' way of ensuring their influence would be remembered. Sarah felt the weight of connection, of belonging to something vast and ancient. 40,000 years, and the words survived. The communications panel chimed. Ambassador Liu, who'd taken overall command of the diplomatic mission after its mandate had expanded so dramatically, appeared on screen. Dr. Chen, High Priest Velthoron, we're ready to begin contact procedures. The Meridian government has been responding to our signals. They're cautious, but interested. Sarah, I'd like you to handle the initial linguistic exchange. Sarah had done this 7 times now. Each time felt like a miracle. She opened the communication channel, her words being broadcast to the Meridian government's diplomatic frequency. She spoke in their language, which her team had been studying for weeks from their broadcasts. Greetings to the Meridian people. We are explorers from distant worlds, seeking connection and friendship. We come bearing knowledge of a shared past, of teachers who visited your world long ago. We would like to speak with you about the Starbringers. The response took several minutes. When it came, the Meridian diplomat's voice was cautious, confused. How do you know of the Starbringers? These are matters of our most ancient faith. Sarah took a breath. This was the moment that never got easier. The moment when she told an entire civilization that their gods had been mortal refugees trying to do good in a dying universe. "Because some of us are their descendants," she said simply, "and we've come home." The weeks that followed were intense. The Meridian, like every other species they'd contacted, went through shock, disbelief, and finally acceptance, as the evidence became undeniable. The Gates records, the genetic analysis, the linguistic parallels, it all added up to an impossible truth that was somehow real. Sarah found herself standing before the Meridian Philosophical Council, translating ancient human words that had been preserved in their prayers for 40 millennia. The head counselor, an elderly Meridian named Threes in Harmony, wept openly as Sarah explained the meaning behind the ritual phrases they'd recited every day without understanding. "We thought ourselves chosen," Threes in Harmony said, "specially blessed by divine beings who selected us alone, to learn we were one of many, that our gods were mortal refugees, sharing what they could with anyone who needed it." The counselor paused, collecting themselves. "It is more beautiful than divinity. It is choice. It is compassion." That evening, Sarah sat in the Legacy's common area with Velthorin and Cree 9 Ascending, a Vrethan philosopher who joined their crew at the Second World. They'd fallen into a habit of meeting after major diplomatic sessions, processing together what they were learning. 17 worlds, Cree 9 Ascending said, their bioluminescent skin patterns shifting to thoughtful blue. 17 species uplifted, taught, given the tools to survive and thrive. All by 5,000 desperate refugees who could have hoarded their knowledge, could have established themselves as rulers, could have prioritized their own survival above all else. Instead they taught, Velthorin said. They shared. They hoped. And then they went home to die, Sarah added quietly. Most of them never made it back to Earth. The ones who did found a world that couldn't use their knowledge, couldn't understand their technology. They integrated. Let everything they'd built dissolve into myth. Bet everything on the long odds that humanity would climb back up, and maybe, someday, reach the stars again. It's the saddest beautiful thing I've ever learned, Cree 9 Ascending said. Or perhaps the most beautiful sad thing. Sarah pulled up a star chart on her tablet, showing the 17 worlds highlighted across the galaxy. 8 visited, 9 still to go. Beyond them, other civilizations they'd already detected, some even more advanced than the ones uplifted by the refugees. The galaxy is so much more complicated than we imagined, she said. We're not the first. We're not the most advanced. We're not special. We're just one species among many, trying to figure things out. But you did something remarkable once, Velthorin said. In your darkest moment, facing extinction, you chose to be kind. You chose to lift up others even as you fell. That is special, Sarah. That is worth remembering. 3 months later, Sarah stood before a joint session of the United Nations Assembly and the Kalor High Council, connected by FTL communication, so both could hear simultaneously. The chamber also had representatives from 6 other uplifted species, all gathered virtually to hear what humanity's diplomatic mission had learned. The evidence was laid out comprehensively. Genetic analysis showing human DNA markers in ancient remains on all 17 worlds. Linguistic studies demonstrating the spread of Proto-Indo-European root words across multiple alien languages. Historical records, both from the Gate and from each world's own preserved archives, all telling the same story. Humanity had walked among the stars before. They'd fallen, lost everything, and had to rebuild from scratch. But in their brief moment of advancement, they'd chosen to share rather than dominate, to teach rather than conquer, to plant seeds of hope even as their own civilization died. Sarah held up 2 artifacts for the cameras. One was a 40,000-year-old Kalor prayer stone, its surface worn smooth by countless faithful hands. The other was a fragment of Sanskrit text on preserved palm leaf, one of Earth's oldest surviving written documents. For 40,000 years, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. We climbed from the caves, learned to make fire, invented the wheel, developed agriculture. We thought we were starting from the beginning, that every achievement was new. She placed the two artifacts side by side. We weren't starting from the beginning. We were starting again. Our ancestors reached the stars 70,000 years ago, developed faster than light travel, created technologies we're only now beginning to rediscover. When catastrophe struck, they scattered, carrying human knowledge and human language across the galaxy. They taught 17 species. They uplifted entire civilizations from the Stone Age. They gave everything they had to ensure that intelligence, that consciousness, that hope would survive even if humanity didn't. And then they tried to come home. 10. Sarah's voice caught slightly. Most of them died trying. The few who made it back found an Earth that had survived but barely. A human population reduced to scattered groups of survivors struggling to remember how to survive. The returning refugees could have set themselves up as gods, as rulers. Instead, they chose to become human again. They integrated. They let their technology die. They bet everything on the belief that humanity would climb back, would reach for the stars again, would someday be ready to understand what their ancestors had done. She gestured to the artifacts. These are not just historical objects. They're bridges. Bridges across 40,000 years, connecting us to a past we forgot we had, and to cousins we didn't know we'd made. Sarah looked directly into the camera, knowing her words were being heard on Earth, on the Kalor homeworld, on Vrith and Kethral and Zephan and 4 other worlds where her distant cousins listened. We spent 40,000 years apart, thinking we were alone. The Kalor thought their gods had abandoned them. The Vrithan thought the Bright Ones had judged them unworthy. The Kethral thought the first voices had fallen silent, and humanity thought it was the first and only intelligent species from Earth to reach space. We were all wrong. We weren't alone. We weren't abandoned. We were family, separated by time and distance, but family nonetheless. Our ancestors made sure of that. They walked among the stars and planted gardens of civilization, asking nothing in return but that those gardens grow. Sarah picked up the prayer stone, feeling its weight in her hand. They didn't want gods. They wanted children. They wanted descendants who would continue the work they'd started, who would reach out to new species with kindness rather than conquest, who would choose teaching over domination. She set down the stone and looked around at the assembled representatives, human and alien, all descendants of those long-ago refugees' hopes. 40 millennia later, those children have found each other. We stand here together, 17 species from 17 worlds, all carrying fragments of a human legacy that refused to die. Sarah spoke the ancient blessing in Proto-Indo-European, the same phrase she'd spoken on the Kalor homeworld 6 months ago, the phrase that had started this entire journey. We walk in light. We walk in light. Velthorin stood from his seat in the Kalor delegation, his 3 eyes bright. He responded in Kalor, and translation software rendered it in a dozen languages simultaneously. We walk in light. Together. 12er. One by one, representatives from each of the uplifted worlds stood and repeated the phrase in their own languages. The Vrithan, the Kethral, the Zephani, the Meridian, all speaking words their ancestors had learned from desperate human refugees 40,000 years ago. And in the UN Assembly, in the Kalor High Council chamber, on ships and stations and worlds across a vast stretch of space, the children of Earth and the students of Earth's children spoke together. We walk in light, together. Later, as the legacy prepared to depart for the 9th world on their list, Sarah stood on the observation deck, watching the stars. Velthoran joined her, as had become their custom. What do you think they would say? He asked quietly. The refugees. If they could see what we've become? Sarah considered the question. She thought about 5,000 desperate humans choosing to share their dying technology with primitive aliens. She thought about them teaching, nurturing, hoping, even as their own world died behind them. She thought about them choosing to integrate rather than dominate when they finally made it home. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "they'd be proud. Not because we've achieved anything special, but because we're still trying, still reaching out, still choosing connection over isolation, still choosing to share knowledge rather than hoard it, still believing that intelligence, wherever it appears, deserves a chance to grow. They gave us light," Velthoron said. "Not because they were gods, but because they were people who refused to let the darkness win. And now, we pass it on," Sarah said. She pulled up the star chart showing the remaining worlds to visit. 9 more species to contact. 9 more gardens planted by ancient refugees to rediscover. Beyond them, the wider galaxy waited. Species they hadn't met yet. Civilizations that had developed independently. New challenges and new opportunities. The 17 uplifted worlds were just the beginning. Just the family reunion before the real work started. "What do you think happens after we've found all 17? Velthoron asked. Sarah smiled. "Then we keep going. We meet new species, share what we know, learn what they can teach us. We build something together. All of us. Not an empire, not a hierarchy, just a community. A family that keeps growing. Like the refugees wanted," Velthoron said. "Exactly like they wanted." The Legacy's engines hummed to life. Course was set for Haven 9, where another species waited to learn they'd never been alone. That 40,000 years ago, someone had cared enough about their survival to give them the gift of knowledge. Sarah watched the stars begin to move as the ship accelerated. Somewhere out there, separated by vast distances and 40 millennia of history, 17 civilizations were having the same realization. They were connected. They were family. They were part of something larger than themselves. Humanity had walked among the stars before and fallen. But in falling, they'd scattered seeds that grew into forests. And now, climbing back to the stars, humanity found itself surrounded by those forests, welcomed by the descendants of species they'd helped save. They'd thought themselves starting over. Instead, they were coming home. The Legacy jumped to FTL, carrying its crew of distant cousins toward the next world, the next reunion, the next chapter in a story that had begun 40,000 years ago, with 5,000 refugees who refused to let hope die. In the observation deck, Sarah Chen and Velthoron stood together, human and Kalor, descendant and student, both children of ancestors who'd believed that kindness mattered more than survival, that teaching mattered more than power, that hope mattered more than despair. "We walk in light," Sarah said softly. "Together," Velthoron agreed. And across the stars, 17 worlds echoed the same truth.